this is one of those injuries that could potentially be a life-threatening ordeal if it's not taken care of sooner rather than later. And I think with LaMarcus's case here, I think he made absolutely the right decision to call it quits. It's like we talked about just a couple minutes ago. He's been in the league for 15 years. He's had a tremendous career in the NBA. Granted, he didn't win any championships when he was with Portland or San Antonio, but in retrospect, does it really matter? And granted, I know he signed with Brooklyn to try to get maybe one more before the end of his career. Whether he gets one or not from Brooklyn, we'll see. Just because he was on the roster, I don't know if there's like a minimum number of games that you have to play to be
You have to
considered.
play, I want to say about over 20 or 30 games. You have to play more than a quarter of the season to like qualify for an earned ring.
It's just that I will probably think that Brooklyn's probably going to make him a ring.
Yeah, of course.
If they actually win the finals this year, which they have a very good chance of
a
winning.
lot of teams do that.
It's like I said, though, LaMarcus has been probably one of the best power forwards that we've seen in this league for probably the last decade plus. And it's just really unfortunate to see his career cut short due to this irregular heartbeat situation that he has. Kev, there's not really much that I could really add more than that. I just feel awful for the guy.
I mean, I as a Mavs fan, like I said, LaMarcus had a lot of amazing games against us. I mean, I'm just thinking of a couple of games. I know a few years back when the Blazers were kind of fully loaded with Brandon Roy, Wesley Matthews, LaMarcus Aldridge, Nicholas Batum, and that whole roster. Dallas did beat them in our championship run in 6 games, but there was a couple of games in that season, if I remember correctly, in which LaMarcus Aldridge hit game winners in both games to beat us. And I just think back to how unguardable he seemed to have been back then, how he kind of carried that mid-range to just behind the 3-point line, or excuse me, just in front of the 3-point line accuracy. I mean, anywhere from 10 to what seemed to be 20 feet, this man was just money. Pick and roll, pick and pop, finishing at the rim, free throw percentage. He did it all. Yeah, I believe he had 5 or 6 All Pros in his NBA career. I actually listened to a segment of Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman this morning while I was on a break, and Max Kellerman made a good point. And that point was that LaMarcus Aldridge played at the wrong time because in his career, the league changed to being guard dominant. Mm-hmm. And as he was cooking, so to speak, in his later years in Portland before he became the power forward for the Spurs, the league had just changed into, like we had just talked about, Steph and all these other shooters from outside, KD. It just became straight up just a jump shot, guard heavy, dominant ball handling league. Mm-hmm. And the pick and pop and the, mid-range jump shot kind of faded away from a lot of players, especially a lot of bigs. LaMarcus Aldridge could shoot the 3, but he wasn't the greatest 3-point shooter. Granted, a 6'11" power forward shooting over 30% is decent, but I mean, he wasn't as consistent as he was for mid-range. So if he would have been in any other era, he would have continued his dominance. Obviously, his highest scoring percentage, his highest scoring year was, I believe, 23.9 or 24.2 points per game in Portland. And he was just, like we talked about, just dominant and consistent. And that transition to San Antonio kind of changed over time, so to speak, especially later on with the acquisition of DeMar DeRozan and whatnot and athletic guards that San Antonio did end up going out and get later in the season or later in the years. But there really isn't much to say other than that, man. He was a great player to watch. He was a great competitor. It does suck to see his season end the way that it did, especially with Brooklyn trending in the direction that they are. But when it comes to health reasons, it's any sport. And it doesn't matter if it's basketball, it could be football, it could be baseball, it could be badminton. If there's something life-threatening, you got to hang it up. He played 15 years. He's got to have enough money saved up to provide for his family. He's got to have enough money situated to do what he's got to do as a man and, as a father. But he did the right thing, and he should walk away from this game with no regrets. I mean, unfortunately, it did shorten his career probably less than what he wanted to or faster than what he wanted to. But in my opinion, there was no decision. The second he found out what it was, he knew he had to hang it up, and he didn't resist. So good for him.
I will say this about LaMarcus. LaMarcus is one of those players that I love to talk about simply because he doesn't get the shine that I think he truly deserves. And trust me, I know there's a lot of attention that's paid to like the top, 5 guys in the league, like KD, LeBron, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. Like, granted, I know those players are phenomenal, but when you look at somebody like LaMarcus Aldridge, just the model of consistency that he had throughout his entire career, like, what more can you ask for from the guy? The guy's going out there and averaging somewhere in between 20 to 24 points a game throughout most of his career in Portland. Pretty much does the same thing when he goes to San Antonio and is one of the more efficient power forwards as far as shooting goes that we've seen in NBA history. It's like he's not flashy, but it works. And sometimes like those players that just get the job done. Granted, it may not be in the flashiest way. It may not get like the most clicks on Twitter because he's not posterizing people every weekend like the Charlotte Hornets are. But he's just a phenomenal player. And he doesn't really seek a lot of attention. He seems like kind of like laid back guy, seems a very chill, very nice guy. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be weird not seeing LaMarcus Aldridge out in the court anymore, simply just because the guy was just a great player.